Welcome to the Clued In Mystery Podcast. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brooke, and we both love mystery.
Hi, Brooke. It feels like every time we have a guest, we start off by saying how excited we are, and this episode is no different. I'm very excited about today's episode.
I am too. I am so excited to finally meet in person Manon Wogan. She is somebody that I really enjoy getting to know on Instagram, and I love all that she does there for mystery lovers. So this is going to be a really fun day.
Okay, so let's get started.
Manon Wogan is a mystery reader and lover who is lucky enough to work with books daily. Also known as Mystery Manon on Instagram, Manon is the editor of the Clues Letter, a weekly email newsletter for fellow mystery lovers. Each issue of the Clues Letter includes news and new releases and a featured podcast. It includes ebook deals and an author interview. When Manon isn't reading books, she's working with them. As the publishing operations manager at Author Imprints, she helps self-published authors create and promote their books. Manon has a BA in art history from Chapman University, which she credits for her obsessions with beautiful books and the Chicago Manual of Style.
Welcome, Manon.
Hi, Brooke. Hi, Sarah. It's so good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We're so excited.
I'm so excited that you agreed to join us to talk about the Detection Club. It's such a fascinating piece of history in the mystery world.
I'm really excited to talk about this. I think there's a lot here and a lot that was a big deal then and is still a big deal now.
Absolutely. So let's start with a little introduction to the club. It was formed in 1930, originally as a means for influential detective novelists to socialize. The original members of the Detection Club included Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Ronald Knox, and G.K. Chesterton, who was also the club's first president, a position he held until 1936. Since Chesterton, there have been 8 presidents, including Dorothy L. Sayers, Agatha Christie, Simon Brett, and most recently, Martin Edwards. Edwards describes it as the oldest social network of crime writers. They currently hold 3 dinners annually, and those are held in London, so most of the members are British, although they have invited members from elsewhere to join. Ronald Knox is credited with the rules that are associated with the club. And reading through the rules, they reflect some of the conventions that mystery authors tend to follow. But Martin Edwards describes them as being satirical and often misrepresented. The founders developed an elaborate initiation ceremony, which continues to be practiced today, as well as an oath, which has been modified over time. The oath started out as, "Do you promise that your detectives shall well and truly detect the crimes presented to them, using those wits which it may please you to bestow upon them, and not placing reliance on, nor making use of, divine revelation, feminine intuition, mumbo-jumbo, jiggery-pokery, coincidence, or act of God." Members were also required to honor the King's English, and should they fail to honor the oath, would be cursed. With, "May other writers anticipate your plots, may total strangers sue you for libel, may your pages swarm with misprints, and your sales continually diminish." I can't think of a worse fate for an author. Originally, the club only invited authors of detective mysteries. They excluded thriller authors and other authors of other works in the mystery genre until after the Second World War. And the current membership is made up of authors of, spy novels, thrillers, detective mysteries. The common thread is that they love writing, and what they write fits under the crime fiction umbrella. Members are elected by secret ballot, and current members include Ian Rankin, Sophie Hannah, Alexander McCall Smith, and Ellie Griffiths. One thing that I thought was really interesting is that Agatha Christie, in her books, said that her character, Ariadne Oliver, is a member of the Detection Club. So let's talk a little bit about the rules that Knox created. I'll read through them, and then I think it would be really interesting to hear your perspective on them, Manon. So the first rule was the criminal must be mentioned in the early part of the story, but must not be anyone whose thoughts the reader has been allowed to know. The second was all supernatural or preternatural agencies are ruled out as a matter of course. The third, Not more than one secret room or passage is allowable. Fourth, no hitherto undiscovered poisons may be used, nor any appliance which will need a long scientific explanation at the end. 5, no Chinaman must be a figure in the story. And just a note on that rule, I think it was intended not so much to exclude a particular culture, but to avoid cultural cliches. Number 6, no accident must ever help the detective, nor must he ever have an unaccountable intuition which proves to be right. Number 7, the detective himself must not commit the crime. Number 8, the detective is bound to declare any clues which he may discover. Number 9, the sidekick of the detective, the Watson, must not conceal from the reader any thoughts which pass through his mind. His intelligence must be slightly, but very slightly, below that of the average reader. And twin brothers and doubles generally must not appear unless we have been duly prepared for them. As a reader, Manon, which of these rules do you feel all authors should follow?
Well, first, I think in the Dorothy L. Sayers episode, I just listened to it, and I think, Brooke, you called these fair play rules, and that's kind of exactly what they are. You don't want to take a cheap shot with your reader. You want the reader to have an ample shot at, determining the solution to the mystery or the murderer. I think probably the ones that matter to me the most are the criminal must be someone mentioned in the early part of the story. I think it's really important to introduce possible suspects very early on. And I also I really like the stupid friend of the detective, rule number 9 about the Watson, because I think that's such a great tool. And you see that all the time in mysteries where there's a sidekick, somebody who is there to support the detective. And while you may not understand or be privy to the thoughts of the detective themselves, you almost always have some insight into the stupider sidekick. And the fact that the sidekick's intelligence must be slightly below that of the average reader, just so that, again, these rules are all about giving the average reader a good shot at determining the detective or the solution. And by having a sidekick that's kind of one step behind you as the reader, that pushes you forward. And I think that's really effective.
I agree with that about the sidekick, because I think I've shared before that, especially as a younger reader, I always felt relieved when that person came on stage, because I thought, oh, okay, this is how I feel right now. Because the sleuth seems like such a superhero, especially in the classic mysteries, right? And they've got it all figured out. And it was always a relief when the sidekick would admit that they had no idea what was going on. And you're right, it keeps you involved. It keeps pulling you along in the story, where otherwise you might get frustrated and think, well, this isn't for me. That character, we can see ourselves in them.
I like the rule about the supernatural or preternatural agencies. I think it's really interesting to talk or to think about them outright banning the supernatural when that's such a big part of mysteries today. There's a whole paranormal cozy mystery genre dedicated to having supernatural elements in addition to a mystery, which is really interesting. And I was just thinking about your previous episodes on Arthur Conan Doyle, talking about how he had his own beliefs in the supernatural, or wanting to investigate ghosts and things like that. And the fact that his character of Sherlock Holmes was so based in true detective work and science, and yet he had that other side to him. And here we are having a rule that, doesn't necessarily need to be followed, but very directly says it's not a good idea to use ghosts or supernatural agencies to solve a mystery. And that's kind of a cheap thing to do. Very interesting if you compare that to today's book market and what people are interested in.
True.
Absolutely. And the rules have been bent and broken by authors since. Really, the rules should be seen as guiding principles for authors. For me, I think the one about the detective being bound to declare any clues he discovers is really important when we're talking about fair play.
Mm-hmm.
If you're
Yeah.
a reader and the detective reveals his solution and you haven't seen anything that he describes, that's not really fair. And you haven't had the chance to get to the same place as the detective.
Yeah. It's not satisfying.
Exactly. Yeah. I think a lot of these rules are really good at preventing lazy writing so that you don't have a writer just taking, I think I said this, but cheap shots or just taking the easy way out. Like, I love the one about not more than one secret room or passage is allowable, because in my mind that kind of implies that somebody had written just a book riddled with secret rooms and passages.
Uh-huh.
And they had to say, you know what, we're gonna cap it. We're gonna you can't do more than one, because otherwise, it's a little bit lazy of you. And yeah, I think that's really a great rule, and it's one of the more blunt ones and simple ones in the list.
That brings up a good point too, Manon, because I think that these people were friends, right? They sat around and they had dinner together and they knew each other's writing inside and out. And some of this is done in a playful fashion, right? They are poking fun at kind of each other and some of the things that maybe they have seen the others do. And it's tongue in cheek. I don't think that they ever expected anyone to follow the letter of the law, but it does make for a more satisfying read, like we've already said, if you at least play by most of them.
Mm-hmm.
It would be interesting to know the history behind some of these rules. I imagine you're right, Manon. There must have been something behind each of them. Actually, I think that's the rule of the origin. I think that's the origin of the rule about no cultural cliches. I think Knox was really frustrated by stereotypes appearing in several books and was really discouraging that it's continued happening by other writers. It would be really interesting to see an analysis of each of the rules and their origins.
Yeah, and I think about that rule. I saw one person, I think on their blog, describe it as no suspicious foreigners, and I think that's a good way of thinking about that, because there's like this fear in a lot of detective novels of the unknown, and I think a lot of early authors put those people in that category. I remember reading a short story by one of the members of the club, R. Austin Freeman. I don't think I finished it because he stereotyped Italians to the point where it was very obvious that the Italian was the murderer. And it's funny because he's a member of the club, and here's this rule about no suspicious foreigners. And he wrote this Italian that was so, naturally aggressive and things like that. I just didn't finish the story. And then I was reading Murder on the Orient Express, and I think Agatha Christie was poking fun at this stereotype quite a bit, because one of the characters really suspects the Italian on the train, the Italian man, of stabbing the body or the victim. And he keeps saying these Italians are untrustworthy. They're very aggressive. They're prone to stabbing. Like the knife is the Sicilian's tool or something. He says it like that. And it felt like Agatha Christie was really poking fun at those kind of stereotypes about people who are just naturally suspicious because of where they're from. I think that was a very conscious thing on her part to make fun of that stereotyping.
Yeah, those passages kind of had me laughing out loud.
Me too.
And Christie, these rules were established in 1930. The Death of Roger Ackroyd was published in 1926, and I've seen reference to the Detection Club considering expelling her because she broke some of the rules in that book. But Martin Edwards, in one of the things that he's written about the Detection Club, talks about how that is completely fiction. Her book was published several years before the rules were established. It's kind of like what you were saying earlier, Manon, about the supernatural, right? You think about how many books were written now with an unreliable narrator as the device in the book. And it just really speaks to how the genre has evolved over time.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is great about these rules, that they can be more guidelines, and you can get rid of as many as you need to and still have, a viable story and an entertaining story. But if you're trying to write a true detective story, I think you should probably follow these a little bit more closely. But if you want to get a little bit experimental, I don't see an issue with that, because obviously The Murder of Roger Ackroyd has become one of her most famous and beloved works. So it's kind of, worth taking that shot of breaking that rule, even if these rules hadn't been invented at the time she wrote it. I think it can make for very interesting and effective work of mystery.
It reminds me a lot about just in English class in general, where, they really want you to follow all the rules of grammar rules, for instance, or actual writing rules. But once you know the rules, then you can kind of play with them and break them, maybe even with punctuation or with grammar things, because then you're doing it on purpose. And definitely these detective fiction authors were playing with them and doing things on purpose, and creating just really unique stories that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brooke. I think you need to understand the rules before you can break them.
Yes.
So, Manon, I was speaking with a bookseller who told me that Golden Age mysteries have sold particularly well since the pandemic. Have you seen any of that in your experience, either as a reader or in your work in the publishing industry?
Well, just from a book industry perspective, book sales have really skyrocketed since the pandemic. I think that's a very easy statement to make, just saying people are home all the time now, or more so, and it's very natural that a lot more readers will pop up and start buying books, which is great for the industry. In terms of Golden Age mysteries selling better, I'm not super sure about that, but I do love to hear that, because I know personally I've been trying to get into them more, because I think they're just they're so much fun, and usually they're very, easy to read, I think, and very entertaining. I hope that they get more and more popular, because there's so many authors that I think deserve a little bit more of that popularity. I mean, obviously, Agatha Christie is fantastic, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as well, but I think there are probably other authors that deserve that same level of, or a similar level of fame, and I hope that people are going to be discovering them more. I know after doing all this work looking up the Detection Club, I know that there's quite a few works that I would like to read now, and I've never read any Dorothy L. Sayers at all, and I really want to get into that, because I think once you learn a little bit about how seriously a lot of these authors were taking the craft, even if it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, they're still, discussing their mystery writing with these other authors, and that kind of makes you want to understand what they're writing and, read a little bit more into it.
I read the first part of Martin Edwards' book, The Golden Age of Murder, and in that he explores the impact of the Detection Club on crime fiction. So he talks about what was going on in the world. They had recently come out of the First World War. Spanish flu was fresh in people's minds. Rising cost of living, word games, particularly crosswords, were very popular. And there was just sort of this endless string of negative news. And I think it's really interesting that we find ourselves in a similar climate. So we're still in the midst of a pandemic. Word games like Wordle are popular. Rising inflation, and yeah, we've got an endless string of negative news. So I can see how people would be drawn into getting comfort from books and comfort from mystery, particularly the ones that are from the Golden Age. And I think mystery just has continued to be a popular genre. So it's not surprising to me that there's been a resurgence in interest in books by these authors. Like you, I haven't read many works from members of the Detection Club, but I was really surprised to learn that A.A. Milne was one of the first members.
Yeah. I did read that, actually. I read his mystery, The Red House Mystery. And if you have an opportunity to read it, I highly recommend it. It's, a murder mystery, a locked room murder mystery set in the English countryside. And it has a lot of these, it has, honestly, looking at these 10 commandments of detective fiction and knowing that Milne was in the club, I couldn't help but realize just how well he followed these. And it turned out to be a really surprisingly entertaining book. There wasn't anything intensely shocking, but it was fun and funny. And that's like a little gem that, had I not been aware that he had written that, I wouldn't have ever, picked that up. So it's in the public domain. If you want to give it a read, you can get it on Project Gutenberg and get the ebook for free. So definitely recommend that one. And that makes me wonder how many other hidden gems are, have been written by these authors. Like I know there's a lot more out there to read. So it makes me really excited to hopefully look up some of these people and their books.
Yeah, that's such a nice thing that a lot of this work is in the public domain, making it really easy to track down copies. What I found interesting about Milne's book is that he wrote it before the Winnie the Pooh stories were published. And it was actually his only mystery novel. I think I read somewhere that he wanted to write another mystery, but was discouraged by his publisher of Winnie the Pooh because there was concern that it would draw away from those children's books. So you wonder what else he might have come up with had he taken that opportunity.
And I love that he's in the Detection Club with just one book, because a lot of these authors wrote a lot. They were really prolific. And I thought maybe he had written more because he's one of the more well-known authors on the list that I have. But just one book, as far as I know, and a good one, thankfully. But he's in the club.
Yeah, the fact that it's invitation only. What a wild invitation to receive. I don't know if you get a phone call or a letter, but what a moment to find out that you've been invited to join. I wonder if anyone has ever declined.
I know. I feel like there's not a lot of centralized information about the Detection Club either. I don't know if they're intentionally trying to be mysterious, true to their name, but I almost wish there was like an official website or something to have, to learn more about the Detection Club, because there's so much history, and I think there could be a lot of resources on the website about the club and what they're doing now and what they used to do, and a bit of a lost opportunity in my opinion. But then again, they might just be intentionally trying to remain mysterious, which is also kind of fun.
I was struck by the way that, not so much now, but in the original club, how it provided a lot of the same interaction that we all can get now just at our fingertips with social media. The three of us communicate on a daily basis and kind of talk shop if we feel like it. And I do so with a lot of different authors online, but the opportunity that they wanted to do that same thing. They wanted to spend time together and just be with other people who liked to talk about stories and mystery as much as they did. So I enjoyed that part about the original club.
I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true, but I read somewhere that in the late 1920s, when Anthony Berkeley, who played, I think, the largest role in organizing the club and setting it up, he began hosting dinner parties. And I think it was Martin Edwards who alluded to this, that it was possibly to help cheer up Agatha Christie because she was going through a rough time with her husband, cheating on her and having an affair. And so I think it was implied that she was a bit down in the dumps, and Anthony Berkeley began hosting these dinner parties with fellow crime writers as a way to have that fun socialization. And then it turned into something a little bit more formal and yet still, really fun, I think. I mean, we could talk more about the initiation process and the oath and Eric the Skull that they brought out to, for those ceremonies, an actual human skull, which I thought was illegal. I don't know if they still have it, but human remains. It seems a little bit touchy, but
They do. Yeah, I've heard that they still have Eric the Skull. However, maybe it is a faux skull these days. I don't know.
Yeah, you can tell that they were really having fun with themselves when they were establishing some of this ceremony.
I don't know. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderfully macabre ceremony, and I think it's true to form. There, a lot of these mystery novels, by breaking down something that's so terrible and traumatic like a murder and making it into more of a fun puzzle to solve, they make it fun and entertaining. And I love that the initiation process and the rules of the club play into that, like, whimsy and fun.
I think it speaks to the fact that it kind of takes a certain type of person to get into this. Like, I'm the person who I see a bag of trash by the side of the road and I say to my husband, do you think that there's a dead body in there? And he's, rolls his eyes and is a little like worried about my sanity, right? But these people were that way. They're like, we've got to have dinner together and talk this out, because their spouses and their friends were probably, rolling their eyes and worried about them in the same way. So it takes like a certain brand of people to get it and to want to talk about these kind of puzzles and solutions and mysteries all the time. So they found one another, and I think they did have a lot of fun. One of the things I read was that because they were doing these collaborative books together, which we can kind of talk more about, they were earning a substantial amount of money from these publications. And it said that they were able to rent rooms in Soho to hold their meetings in for a while. This was before the World War, but and basically they would meet and sort of write and hang out and then also party and then go back to their rooms in Soho. So they had a lot of good times together, I think.
I think they absolutely did. I would just love to be a fly on the wall in any of those meetings. I think they would have the most interesting conversations.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the publications. I know they did some round robin novels. The logistics of those must have been really interesting to work out. And then some short story collections, and more recently, the book on craft with 90 essays. I think it was one for each year of the club's existence. And I've read some of those, and they're quite good because they're written obviously by masters of the genre. Have they recently done a round robin? I don't think so.
I was looking on Amazon and I saw a few more recent ones, but I'm not sure if they did one of those. You can actually look up, I think the Detection Club is treated as an author on Amazon, so you can click on the Detection Club and see all their books, just in case anyone is interested in that.
I have not read any of the collaborative works, so I would be interested. Have either of you read any of like the round robin stories?
No, I actually haven't read any of the round robin stories. I did read Six Against the Yard, which is the short stories with an analysis of each story by an investigator from Scotland Yard. I thought it was a nice sample of works of those authors.
I think it's really interesting that collaborative fiction, it's something that continues to be really popular today, and I've seen it. I've seen a lot of authors participate in collaborative fiction, and mystery, I think, is one of the most popular genres to do that in. And what I find really interesting is the Agatha Christie Company tends to do these collaborative fiction works, or just collection works of short stories. And they just announced one recently called Marple, which includes a bunch of different authors, some of them really famous like Lucy Foley and Leigh Bardugo, who come together and they write these brand new stories with Marple as the character. And, the Agatha Christie Company really works overtime in making sure that her legacy stays alive. And I think this is a really interesting way to take these popular authors and a classic character and put them together in a work of collaborative fiction. And it reminded me a lot of what the Detection Club was known for doing. It's kind of what the Agatha Christie Company is doing as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And is that the collaboration that's set to come out at Christmas time?
I think so. It's the one with like roses on the cover. I saw it on Instagram.
So it made me think about your Christie for Christmas too. They're like continuing that marketing strategy as well.
Yeah, they're really good with their marketing and making sure that there's new Agatha Christie content coming out, which I think is really exciting.
Manon, did you have any other points or research or thoughts about the club that you wanted to share?
I think we have our homework cut out for us to go and read some of these stories.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I found for all of the episodes that we've done that there's just so much more that we could learn and talk about. So it may be that we revisit some of the Detection Club or some of these authors after we've had a chance to read a bit more of their work, and we can regroup and talk about them a little bit more.
That's a great idea.
I think somebody should create a Detection Club book club where you just read some of these classic novels and short stories. There's so much to read. And like you said, a lot of them are in the public domain, so they're really accessible too, which is fantastic.
Thank you very much for joining us, Manon. It was wonderful to have you join us and be part of this conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invite. It was an opportunity to do a little research and learn about something fun and have a conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today on Clued in Mystery. I'm Brooke.
I'm Sarah, and we both love mystery. Clued in Mystery is produced by Brooke Peterson and Sarah M. Steben. Music is by Shane Ivers at silvermansound.com. Visit us online at cluedinmystery.com or social media at Clued in Mystery. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or telling your friends.